Sometimes the smallest yes can quietly change to lives in ways neither person expects. If you enjoy reflective, emotionally rich stories like this, leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more. I didn't expect anything unusual when I agreed to help Jacob that evening. I had just finished tidying the garden when my neighbor Marlene called, stressed and apologetic, asking if I could keep an eye on her son while she covered an emergency shift at the clinic. I said yes without much thought. Jacob was 14, polite, reserved, and carried himself with a seriousness that felt older than his years. There was something familiar about him, a reminder of my own son at that age, quietly observant and eager to be taken seriously. I brewed a pot of tea, changed into a comfortable sweater and slacks, and set up the dining table with his books. The house felt calm, bathed in the soft glow of early evening light drifting through the curtains. When Jacob arrived, backpack slung over one shoulder, he thanked me earnestly. I offered him juice and some cookies I had baked the night before. He smiled, a little shy, and settled in. The assignment was about civic responsibility and community structure, topics I hadn't thought about in years. Yet as soon as we started reading, the ideas came back easily. I noticed him glancing up at me now and then quickly refocusing on his notes. At first I assumed it was simple nervousness, but there was a quiet attentiveness in the way he listened, how carefully he wrote, how earnestly he asked questions. We talked about how small actions can matter, how kindness can ripple outward in ways you never see. I shared a story about volunteering years ago and how listening sometimes meant more than fixing anything. He seemed deeply affected by that. After a while, he grew thoughtful, his pencil hovering as if stalled by a bigger idea. When I asked if something was wrong, he said he was just thinking about how rare it felt to be spoken to like his thoughts mattered. That caught me off guard. I told him he was thoughtful and that it mattered. He blushed, and the moment lingered longer than either of us expected, heavy but not uncomfortable. We finished the work quietly after that. As he packed up, he hesitated at the door and asked if I ever felt like I was the only one who really listened. I answered honestly, saying maybe that was why listening mattered so much to me. Before leaving, he stepped forward and hugged me briefly, whispering thanks. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different, as if something unseen had shifted, leaving warmth behind where there had only been routine before. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Jacob far more than I expected. As I stirred my coffee and watched the steam fade into the morning light, I tried to understand why such a simple interaction had stayed with me. There was nothing inappropriate about it, nothing dramatic. Yet his words had reached a place in me that had been quiet for years. Since my son moved away and my husband passed, conversations in my life had become functional, brief, polite. Jacob's honesty felt different. It reminded me what it was like to be truly seen. Around midday, Marlene messaged me again, thanking me and asking if Jacob could stop by after school for help with another assignment. I agreed quickly, convincing myself it was practical, nothing more. Still, I prepared the house with more care than usual, setting out cookies and opening the curtains so the room felt warm and welcoming. When Jacob arrived, he seemed lighter, more relaxed, greeting me with a soft smile. This time his homework was literature, Shakespeare, something I once loved teaching years ago. As we read together, discussing characters and hidden motivations, I watched him come alive with curiosity. He noticed emotional details that surprised me, especially for someone his age. When he said I spoke like the stories still mattered, I realized they did, not just to him, but to me. Literature had once been a bridge to meaning in my own life, and I'd forgotten how much it shaped me. Our conversation drifted naturally from the text into more personal territory. He spoke about feeling overlooked at school, about teachers who dismissed him, about wishing he could be someone else. I told him gently that the right people eventually notice the quieter qualities, that sensitivity is not weakness. He looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten when he said, it felt like I understood him in a way others didn't. When he asked if I ever wished someone would say those things to me, I answered honestly that I did. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt full, like something important had been acknowledged without needing explanation. When it was time for him to leave, he asked if he could come back again soon. I said yes without hesitation. As I closed the door behind him, I realized the house no longer felt empty in the way it once did. It felt alive with the echo of meaningful conversation. What we were building wasn't dependency or confusion, but something quieter and more rare. A space where two people, at very different stages of life, felt allowed to be themselves without performing or proving anything. By the third afternoon, his visits had settled into an unspoken routine. The knock came at nearly the same time, soft and familiar, and I found myself looking forward to it in a way that surprised me. That day the sky was heavy with clouds, and a cool breeze slipped through the cracks of the house, so I lit a candle and let its warm scent fill the room. When Jacob stepped inside, he greeted me as usual, but didn't take out his books. Instead, he sat quietly, his hands folded, as if considering something important. After a moment, he asked if we could just talk instead of working. I agreed without hesitation and brought out hot chocolate instead of tea. We sat across from each other, letting the quiet settle naturally between us. He began asking about my childhood, what I dreamed of becoming, what I had feared when I was his age. At first I laughed, brushing it off as old history, but his seriousness made me answer truthfully. I told him I once wanted to be a writer, how I filled notebooks with stories and poems before life slowly crowded that dream out. When he asked why I stopped, the easy answers sounded hollow, so I admitted that I stopped believing my words mattered. He looked at me with genuine conviction and said that everything I said felt meaningful, like a story unfolding even in conversation. His sincerity caught me off guard, stirring something long dormant in me. I realized how many years I'd spent defining myself through roles instead of passions. He told me that talking to me made him feel normal for thinking deeply, for caring too much in a world that often mocked it. I assured him that sensitivity was rare and valuable, something to protect rather than hide. Then, quietly, he said he sometimes wished I were his mother. The words were gentle, not demanding, and filled with longing rather than desperation. I told him I wasn't, but I cared, and that care still mattered. He accepted that with a small nod. After a pause, he pulled out a folded paper and asked if he could show me something he'd written. It was a short story about a lost boy and a woman who helped him find his way simply by listening. When I finished reading, emotion caught in my throat. He said he wrote it after the first evening we spent together. Instead of speaking, I hugged him, and he hugged me back with quiet gratitude. I told him never to stop writing. When he left that day, I stood alone in the dining room holding his story, aware that something important had taken root in both of us, something tender, grounding, and entirely human. A few days passed before I saw Jacob again, and in that space, the silence in my home felt different than before. It wasn't empty, but reflective, as though the rooms were holding on to echoes of our conversations. I tucked his handwritten story into a drawer with old photographs and keepsakes, instinctively placing it among memories I valued most. When the knock finally came one afternoon, it startled me in the best way. Jacob stood there holding a book instead of his backpack. His expression was calm but thoughtful, as if he had rehearsed what he wanted to say. He asked if we could sit outside since the weather was nice. The early spring air was mild, and the garden showed hints of new life. We sat on the bench beneath the old tree, its branches moving gently overhead. He handed me the book and told me it was for me, encouraging me to start writing again. The simplicity of the gesture carried more weight than any elaborate gift. I told him I couldn't believe he remembered. He replied that he remembered everything I said. The words settled between us, heavy with sincerity. He spoke next about how much he'd been thinking, about who he wanted to become, and what connection truly meant. I listened without interrupting, sensing how carefully he chose each word. He said being here made him feel safe, understood, and unjudged, and that he hoped to offer that feeling to others someday. I told him he already was, even if he couldn't see it yet. For a while, we sat quietly, watching the light shift through the leaves. Then he said something I knew I would carry with me forever. That knowing me reminded him he was allowed to feel deeply, even when emotions were complicated. Tears slipped free before I could stop them, but I didn't hide them. Standing there with him, I realized how much of myself I'd kept folded away for years. When he stood to leave, there was a calm certainty in his posture, not sadness, just acceptance. I hugged him tightly, aware that this chapter was ending in the way it was meant to, not with loss, but with gratitude. As he walked away down the sidewalk, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet peace, rooted in knowing that some connections change us without needing to last forever. That evening, after the house grew quiet again, I didn't feel the sharp ache people expect from goodbyes. Instead, there was a calm fullness, the kind that comes from understanding something important has completed its purpose. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table a long time, staring at the book Jacob had given me. running my fingers along the cover, as if it might disappear if I looked away. Eventually, I opened a fresh notebook, one that had been sitting untouched in a drawer for years. The pages were blank, intimidating in their cleanliness, yet inviting in a way they hadn't been before. I didn't rush to fill them. I just sat there, breathing, allowing memories to surface naturally. I thought about my younger self, the one who believed words could change things, the one who stayed up late writing because it felt necessary, not productive. Somewhere along the years, I had traded that version of myself for responsibility and routine, convincing myself it was maturity. But Jacob had reminded me that neglecting what makes you feel alive isn't growth, it's loss. I began writing, slowly, not a grand story, just a moment. The sound of a knock at the door, the way evening lights settled across the floor, the simple power of being heard without interruption. The words came easier than I expected, as though they had been waiting patiently all along. Over the next few days, writing became part of my mornings. I didn't tell anyone about it. There was no audience in mind, no goal beyond honesty. It wasn't about becoming something new. It was about returning to something true. Occasionally, I saw Jacob passing by with friends, growing into himself, laughing more freely. We exchanged small waves, nothing heavy, just mutual recognition. I understood then that what mattered wasn't how long someone stays in your life, but what they unlock while they're there. He had taken with him confidence, permission to feel deeply, and I had been left with courage, the kind that doesn't shout, but gently insists you keep going. One afternoon, I noticed the house felt different again, not quiet from absence, but peaceful from presence. The rooms no longer echoed, they listened. I kept writing, page after page, discovering stories I didn't know I still carried, and in that steady rhythm, I realized something simple and profound. Being needed isn't about dependency, and connection isn't about permanence. Sometimes it's just about two people meeting at exactly the moment they're meant to, reflecting each other back into themselves. As the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the floor, I closed the notebook with a quiet smile. For the first time in a very long time, I knew the story ahead belonged to me, and I was finally ready to tell it.